Marina Crane here in Sutena on August 27th, and I thought I'd do a live straight through to my YouTube. Now, I don't know if it's going to actually save on my actual software, but here it goes. So yesterday I published a I picked a podcast, and I had a guest. If you were wondering why my voice is like this, it's again because of the smoke and the pollution. It's been an ongoing battle all summer. The reason why I wanted to post is I wanted to post before I went out for the day. I have some plans. I want to out to a restaurant and just sit down and enjoy myself. The thing about being an elder and being an Indigenous woman and just living by myself is the hard reality that people, the older you get, the more it's like as if it feels like people want you to disappear. And like I gave an example the other day with my brother and sister who are Mormon, and I'm ex-Mormon. I wasn't like a devout Mormon. I'll let you say that. I'll let you understand that because I still have to write to the Mormon Church to have my name stricken off of their books. And this is like decades and decades that I haven't been a Mormon, but I'm pretty sure they've got me sealed in their little registry. But my nephew came over and we're having a discussion on the placement of my sister's house. My sister is Mormon, and again, the things that my siblings talk about, I don't know. And so this morning, talking with my nephew, I realized, oh my goodness, they really do have a good conversation without me being involved, because my nephew said, well, I wish you would all talk to each other. And the reality of it is, like I told him, I said, I choose not to talk to my brother and sister who are Mormon for good reason. And like it's just been an ongoing battle with me and them. And, I refuse to be treated the way they treat me. And again, too, it's continuous. So I have my older brother's children. They're involved with administration. My brother was a land manager, and he passed away quite a few years ago. So why I'm bringing this up is like the placement of my sister's house has been negotiated with my siblings. And so my nephew and I thought everything had been already planned and everything done because they came to me, and then I come to find out like they had been planning other things behind my back and I didn't know it. I'm just fortunate that Sutena has like our housing policy is quite open, and that the chief and council and leadership are not just gearing and honing in on just a few family members. They want everybody to participate in any of the decision making, which is a really good thing, because if that wasn't the case, I wouldn't have known the conspiracy that my brother and sister, the two Mormons, have been conspiring and making plans. And like I said to my nephew, who's not Mormon, and again, too, I wanted to bring this close, and for this podcast is for people to understand alcohol and drug abuse. My father died while he was drunk. He was hit by a car, and for most of my life, I hated the fact that he drank, because there were years where he didn't drink at all. And when my sister and my brother converted to Mormonism, it was under the guise of sobriety. My brother had been drinking, and that was the only way he could sober up. And then my sister, I don't know how true things are, that she'd been sexually assaulted. And again, too, this fear, I don't know where she has conjured up fear of Indigenous communities, like fear of her brothers and sisters. I don't know where she conjured up this whole notion that, white people were a lot safer than her own family members. But in the whole process of it, my mother, to appease my two siblings, joined the Mormon Church, and as a result, she converted her sisters to Mormonism. As a result, like most of my mom's family were Mormon. However, in the latter part of my mother's life, she She didn't want to be buried in a Mormon funeral, and she just wanted one Native American, whoever they were, didn't have to be family, to just read a scripture from the Mormon Church. She didn't want like a Mormon funeral, and she, she was confused about Mormonism, because she'd been sober, like it was like when I say it's like a cult, like AA and the 12-step program. It like the falseness of sisterhood and brotherhood and priesthood, like like it's just I mean, it's the same thing with Moral Rearmament. My parents joined there, and they had like white people who were psychologists and therapists, and yet when my parents needed help, where the hell were they? And it's the same thing with Mormonism. My mother converted, and the family converted, hoping, in some sense, that my father would stop drinking, and that he would join the Mormon Church. Now, this being said, one of my younger sisters lost her husband a few years ago, and they drank most of their life, and I became pretty close to their children, and so I am close to some of my nieces and nephews, but I am not close to the nieces and nephews that are with of my Mormon brother and sister, devout Mormon. Okay, so the irony of the whole thing is like I never paid tithing, or like I never went to any church callings, or went on a mission, or went into the Mormon temple. Never dated a Mormon man. Like all the hypocrisy and the judgment of being single, the pressure from my brother and sister, like it's amazing. My brother, like I said, if he thinks that he's not my father's son, like, and even my sister growing up having people say that she's not my father's daughter because she looks white. Like all this, like I grew up listening to all this stuff, and again, it's not just my family. When I talk about intergenerational trauma, I'm just using my family as an example, because it's all over. It's all over here in Tsuut'ina, each family. And from what my nephew told me, even when it comes to family disputes, it's like the Hatfields and McCoys. People bring out their guns, like when they're talking about where a relative's house should be placed. I mean, it's conflict resolution and family conflict. I know when my brother got arrested and he had to get a lawyer, criminal lawyer, it was $10,000 deposit for a criminal lawyer. And when it comes to children, like I found out that the top child, like for family law, the deposit for the top-notch lawyer is 25,000. So you can see where, the majority of society gears everything to families, and as if, like the children. So, like I said, I was talking to my nephew, and I didn't realize my other nephew had, like, again, I don't talk. I try to talk to my nieces and nephews, but then when it comes out that they aren't transparent with me, then it makes me realize that they have issue with me. And my one nephew, his sister followed Nathan Chasinghorse for decades, and this nephew would get mad at me when he'd say, "Talk to my sister," and I'd say, "I try to talk to her. She won't talk to me for 3 months, sometimes a year." It was just like the whole nature of people getting mad at me because whatever the relationship with Nathan Chasinghorse was, as if I had some sort of power or control over that. And the fact too that, my brother and my sister, who are Mormon, were like, they just thought that Native American spirituality was witchcraft. And the reality of it too is like the whole notion of mental health, and as well as like what is it to be Indigenous, because within talking to my nephew and about his cousins and just the reality of what is it to them to be Indigenous and to live in Tsuut'ina, it's amazing that the notion of identity is so open, and yet the ability to like just not accept people, like what I'm trying to get at is my own family doesn't accept me. And like I said to my nephew, I said I put a podcast out yesterday because it was so disturbing, just to be talking about the fallacy of just siblings and the conspiracy they think about our parents. And, for me, like I said to my nephew this morning, I took care of my late mother for 10 years, and it took a toll on me, my physical health. I used to walk. When my mother was alive, I walked around, I pushed her on her wheelchair. I did everything. And when she died, I didn't realize how much I neglected my own health. And I've been on a wheelchair for a long time, just trying to make sure that I keep on top of my health. I took care of my mother was a brittle diabetic, so I took care of her for over a decade. And but the reality of how my brothers and sisters treated me, and just the like I was saying to my nephew, I said I went to therapy because of the lateral violence. It wasn't just that too. Like, my brother committed a crime, and because I was the caregiver, primary caregiver of my mother, everything that my mother wanted done for my brother who was in prison, I had to manage. And I said to my nephew, I said, not one of my siblings ever visited him in prison or spoke to him. And now he's out, he's got a house, and he's looking after his adult children, and he's trying to, just like he said, I have the last part of my life. And I said to my nephew, I said, all my brothers and sisters who live around me, I said, we're all elders. We're all going to pass away, like, probably within the next 10 years, hopefully longer. But I'm just saying, the way things are. My brother passed away at, I think, 68. And the reality of the fact that I have a sister who, like, 3 years ago, the doctor said that she wasn't going to live that long. And I've gone through that with this particular sister, like, for decades. She's just not been well. But she's on blood thinners morning and night now. And the other sister said the doctor told the sister that she could die in her sleep. Her heart could just stop. And then I have a cousin who's got a brain tumor, who they said he only has 6 months to live. And then my sister, her husband's dying of cancer, and she's the reason for this podcast, because she's moving back from Utah. And I said, I don't think she's going to move back. Like this is such a hard podcast to talk about, because her fear of moving back, it's just like moving into the ghetto. Like, I don't know what imagination she has, that she thinks it's so dangerous. And yet, to live in Utah is a whole issue by itself. I have to laugh because, unless you actually live amongst Mormon people and you're a minority and you wear your skin, you really don't get it. But my trying to explain that to people on my podcast, or even how my brother and sister shun me, and the psychology of it, it's not just the religion, it's the basic psychology of coercive control. It's the basic psychology of intergenerational trauma. So even though I talk about my siblings, I'm also talking about other people within my community who have the same dysphoria or dysphoria. I don't know if I'm saying the right word, where we're all similar. And because we have siblings that are the same, that have issues with identity, it's so hard for them to, the history of being called a savage, and like the history of Indigenous women being prostituted. Like, growing up in Canada, there's a city called Regina, Saskatchewan, and all white people and all Indigenous people knew that was the prostitute capital of Indigenous girls in Canada. Now, we talk about human trafficking in the triangle from Edmonton to Winnipeg to Calgary, and Saskatoon. The amount of Indigenous children that are especially girls and women who are being trafficked. It's not a historical thing. It's still happening, and that's the critical thing about intergenerational trauma. I openly talk about healthy human sexuality, and I talk about just the dynamics within my own family, in terms of shunning, in terms of trying to keep things quiet, in terms of making it look like everything's fine when really it's not fine. And so there's that whole notion of like how much of it is the truth. So for me, when I leave things alone and I don't bother my nieces or nephews, or my, I don't bother my sisters or brothers, and then an issue comes up like a policy where they have to come to me and ask me, to sign my name that I approve of this. Then I realize, like, oh my goodness, this is what's been happening. Like, it's sort of an epiphany, or like not deja vu, like, oh my goodness, like the reality of erasing, like the literal, like understand this. I feel erased. I feel like I'm invisible, and yet my siblings think like they used to treat my mom like this. My late mother, she used to say, "I'm not stupid. I know what they're doing." And I said to her, whatever you do to help me in this life, I said, when you're gone, you won't be there to support me. And this is the reality of this podcast, is the reality that when you're a woman and you're older, and you have ageism against you, that people, your own family, has already dismissed you as if you've already died. You're invisible. And that's, like, for me, like I said to my nephew this morning, it took a long time for me. I went to therapy, and I tried to really understand the dynamics of the shunning, the lateral violence from within my own siblings, because there was already lateral violence happening when it came to alerting people about Nathan Chasing Horse, but the intergenerational trauma, even within my own family system and with my own community system, plays a huge impact on just how people relate and feel comfortable in helping each other. That's why, like my niece, when she was apprehended and put in a group home in Calgary, and was trafficked out of there, I the like I said to my nephew, I said, this whole notion of us trying to get our sovereignty. I said, and if we get sovereignty, then our leadership really has to understand they are liable, because when they swear that they take these positions, these political positions that were established by the Canadian government, that they are open to be sued. I said if this crime of Nathan Chasing Horse happened today, or like when, not today, but in the future, when we get sovereignty over our child and family department and programs, the chief and council will have say over, like, establishing group homes, establishing shelters for our children in our communities. They would establish policies for adoption. It's so overwhelming just how far and how ignorant people, including myself, have been about this whole child and family system. That, like on my podcast yesterday, this young woman said she was going to adopt, and then when she found out that the majority of children that are being adopted, like that are in foster care, are Indigenous kids. Imagine that. We're still living in the dark ages, where when I was born in the 1950s, they were selling children. They were selling Indigenous children to people all over the world, and they're still doing that. They're still not allowing our children to be adopted by people like myself, or other people in the community, because we don't have sovereignty over our child and family. Now, that being said, too, there's a lot of things that we really have to be accountable for, and rightfully so. But come on, white people do the same damn thing too, and the reality of it is, it's so engrossed, so enmeshed, that you'd have to be the Virgin Mary or you have to be Jesus Christ himself. And the paradox in that is like when you're backed up into a corner and you have mental health issues, then you have people personifying those, like my brother or Nathan Chasing Horse. You have these people percolating into our societies and saying, "I'm this holy person," and for me, that's like I said, I've grown up in it. My mom and my aunties and uncles and just the conversations seem to have about, people who practice Sundance and sweat lodges. And I want to make it point clear. I'm also talking about Indigenous people who become priests, Anglican Catholic priests, go into Judaism, become, rabbis, or go into Islam and become Islamic. Hey, Indigenous people, you say it, they've done it, okay? So when I talk about spirituality, I'm talking about issues that are Indigenous. I'm not just talking about what you think or your stereotype of what you think Indigenous people are, because we are so diverse. We are so diverse, and that's what really bothers me too when I talk, and yet people who have just been so accustomed to just stereotypes and just believing that that's the way things are. And I'm going, no, those aren't the way things are. The whole structure of education, the whole notion of setting yourself free to ask questions, you have to do that. You have to get an education, and you need to, have the ability to have conversations with other people. Even if you don't like their opinion, it's still important. Like I said, my brother hasn't talked to me since 2013, and my sister, I don't know if she's going to ever move back to Sutina. She signed the paper saying she was. Uh, I don't know how many times I've talked to her in my life. Maybe I could put it up my whole life. Maybe I could say in a whole month. That's how much I've talked to her. And again, for what reason? What reason does she not want to talk to me? And I have to let you understand this, though. I'm just saying it. I'm not saying that I believe it, okay? Because if I believed it, I would be depressed. I'd just isolate and cloister myself. But the reality of it is, I know I'm a good person, and I've fought my whole life to be a good person. So, however and whatever people perceive me to be, and however they handle me or want to dismiss me, that's okay. It hurts when I find out. Like I said, this whole week has been just a crusher, like a heartbreak. And I don't know if you could hear it in my voice, or if you understand, like, just the whole, like, it's um, like when I use the analogy, when people break away from a cult and they realize how much they put into that cult and got nothing out of it, and they're realizing, I wasted my life in this. Then you come to a point where you're going, okay, I made a mistake, and I'm willing to leave that cult. Those are things that I talk about in my podcast, and it comes from that, actually. Like when people say, "Oh, you were Mormon," like they don't realize just how heartbreaking.
Someone with a 403 area code said, link to.
It's like I said, it's a very touchy subject, because I still have family members that are practicing Mormons, or they're using Mormonism to sober up, and that's why, like, I have issue with it. Is that was the whole reason my family joined the church, was to, so my mother didn't have support. She didn't have support from her community, even though she was an alcohol counselor, even though she attended AA and Al-Anon. The lateral violence in terms of human sexuality, everything they would talk to her about, like she was cheating on so and so, and doing, and yet, it was all fabrication, all fabrication. So that's why when I hear these things about my siblings fabricating these things about my two siblings who are Mormon, and yet these two siblings who are Mormon are totally don't even realize what they've created. They don't realize what they've created. It's just, I mean, I have to laugh because it's so sad. It is so sad that they've lived their whole life in denial, and it's sad. I yeah, so it is touchy when somebody says, "Oh, you were Mormon," because it doesn't just take like an afternoon to discuss it. It's a real tearjerker, to realize yes, I did join the church, but I wasn't joining it to quit drinking. I like my mother, bless her heart, she thought she was an alcoholic when she wasn't. And I think it's that fear or that systemic racism of white people projecting their values and beliefs onto you, and you just fawn into it. You fawn into it, or you're limerent into it, and it's very destructive. That's why when white people pretend to be indigenous and they bring this fallacy into this space, we'll call it this sacred space. It's very damaging. It's very damaging. That's why for me to try and explain it in terms of having some sort of accountability for why we for why my family became Mormon. And the majority of my nieces and nephews now who have their own children who are raising them and aren't Mormon, and they're having their own social issues, that they're aware that this is the catalyst that started it all, and it created such a vast expansion of misunderstanding, because the reality of it is, like I said to my nephew, my siblings and I were all seniors, we're all elderly. What's going to be left is for you. I told my nephew, for you and your cousins, your cousins and you are going to be, in, like, my niece is going to take over my home, and the same with all the buildings that my siblings live in. It's our children or our nieces and nephews that are going to inherit this. And so, like, for me, yes, it is heartbreaking that I just say, no, I've done my job. I looked after my mother for over a decade. It took a toll on my health, took a toll on my mental health. It did so much that the fact that I'm managing the way I am managing it, to me, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for, and I keep on saying that, and I know maybe you and my audience might think, oh, gee, she's repeating herself, and it does sound like that, but the reality of it is, like, I grew up with my brothers and sisters, and I know they have problems with their children, but to treat me as being invisible, to think like they can talk and I wouldn't hear what they're talking about, that's the hardest thing for me to admit on this podcast. And yet, who is it hurting? It's hurting them, because they don't have it in them to even get to know me. Like I said, I'm 74. Everything I've talked about and shared in my podcast is sharing with total strangers. Like, you're total strangers out there in cyberspace. I'm getting people from England, United States, Bangladesh, Vietnam, France, Spain, Mexico, and I'm grateful that I can have a podcast and have people interested in what it's like to live, to be an Indigenous woman living on a reserve in First Nations, and what it is for me, how I see and perceive things from a point of view of growing up in a systemic racist society, and even trying to understand, like, once I'm home in my community, that racism, like, you'd think it's going to stop there. There's this magic wand or magic wall or something that protects us, or this dome, but really it doesn't exist, and it affects everybody. So that's why I'm talking about the long-term effects of systemic racism, intergenerational trauma on my siblings and myself. I'm trying to get it across to you. My siblings don't drink and do drugs. For decades they haven't. For decades. And again, I'm not saying because of the Mormon Church, but that was the first what do they call it, crutch. That was the first cult activity we got into, like in terms of long-term cults. There was also moral rearmament that took my parents to South America and India. That was another cult. And then there was the cult of the Anglican Church and Indian Residential School. So all these ritual abuse that's sort of percolating within society. I challenge you, my listeners, to do some self-reflection and look at your own religion, your own values, your own beliefs, and question whether or not you're living in a cult, because it's the dynamics of how you interact with your siblings, your parents, your grandparents. When I was in my teens and 20s, I was totally oblivious. I was saying to my nephew, I said, your dad was having an affair with my best friend, and I didn't know it. And he starts laughing. And I said, that's how close we were. I said, every friend that I had, I said, your father would make a plate on them, and my poor friends would. That's how close my brother and I were. He just like if I had a female friend, he was latching onto her just like that. And my nephew started laughing. I'm talking to him about his dad, because that's, like I said, when you're younger and you're howling at the moon, you don't, like for me, as a senior and trying to understand my own aging process. It's important, to take care of our mental health. So that's why I do my podcast too. I'm trying to have closure with a lot of things that I've been dealing with these past 20 years, and at the same time too, as my life comes to an end, which hopefully won't be for another 10, 20 years. Knock on wood. I mean, actually, like really, in 20 years I'll be 94. And our oldest elder here in Sutena is 97. So, I'm hoping that I can keep on doing recordings and talking about the things that, that I lived through decades, and understanding these things. Because when I talked, like in my podcast yesterday, and I was talking to this young woman, and just the reality of the things that young people are involved in, like what's happening in Palestine, Gaza, even I talk to people about the sons of that son. It has to do with white supremacy, Sons of Canada or something like that. I talk to some people about these things, and then I have other friends that I talk about, Danielle Smith. So I have a large range of people. But I also interact with people in my community. So here's a bit of like, how do I put it? I'm going to put a little comedy in my podcast here. I have two Great Pyrenees dogs, Akechida and Ukshida. Akechida is a name for boy in Sioux, Dakota Sioux. Akechida means warrior. So why did I name my two male Pyrenees Akechida and Ukshida? Well, 55 years ago, I fell in love with, I did, okay, I'm not saying he fell in love with me, a deserter from the U.S. military. He grew up in California, and he ran away. There were a lot of Americans coming into Canada as deserters, not what you call draft dodgers. There were two different. There were draft dodgers and there were deserters. So this fellow was a deserter. So yes, he served. Obviously, he had served time in Vietnam. Like he, because I mean, like I could tell the trauma he carried, and um, so I hit, even like he's almost like a myth or a dream. So for me, in my old age, I'm going, okay, he was a boy and he was a soldier. So that's why I called my Great Pyrenees Huxida Mitawa. So if I say that, that's what I'm calling this person that I met 55 years ago. That means he's my soldier boy. Akichida Huxida Mitawa. And so I just say Akichida and Huxida. So these two Pyrenees, they're 3 years old. But because of this smoke or whatever, I've been indoors. I haven't been really interacting with them. And every day they wander. They've wandered at least 5 kilometers away from my place. And every day, or most of the days this past week, I've had to go on my vehicle and I have to call them home, and they jog beside my car as I drive them home. They will not get in my car. Okay, so I have to, again, today they've left, and they go to building construction sites, and the workers there feed them, and I'm going, please don't feed them. So it's gotten to the point where I've got to buy invisible like fence collars so that they don't wander off too far. And at the same time too, I'm just going, I'm 74. Do I need pets? But yet when I the irony of it is like, yeah, they're sad when I leave and they're happy when I come home. Like just having other living things around is important too. But yeah, Akichida and Huxida, those are my two Pyrenees. And when I lived in the States, I couldn't have pets. I couldn't have I couldn't have a garden, and I even having my own space, my own fridge, I couldn't even have that. So I really cherish my space. I really cherish the the privacy that I have in my home. And you've got to understand the deep psychology of this is that when I was 8 years old, I almost died, and I was placed in an Indian hospital. And for 3 months, I was in total isolation. I know I had my room was behind the doctor's and nurse's desk, but they came in once a day to give me catheters and take blood. I had no crayons, no books, nothing, no TV, nothing. I was in total isolation for 3 months. And I still have to make a claim for that type of abuse, the emotional abuse, the isolation that I went through with the Canadian government, because there's a lawsuit. But that's only part of my story of why today, as a senior, why I like living alone. I know it has to do with what happened to me when I was 8 years old, and as well as like I was constantly babysitting my siblings, and just putting all that energy into looking after them. I always jokingly say my nieces and nephews, not my nieces and nephews, but my sisters, my younger sisters, they were my dolls. Instead of having an actual doll, those were my dolls that I played with. I'd change their diapers, feed them with the bottle, clean, like sterilize the bottles, wash their. It was until 1966 that they had Pampers. So I did all that as a child, all that horrible work, helping my mother, and today, when I think I'm the oldest in the family, and to know that my siblings just don't even think I exist, like I'm invisible to them, and it would be interesting, and it would be encouraging if they made the effort. But like even when I lived in Utah, and I lived in the same town as them, not once did they invite me for dinner, any dinner. Not once did they come over to see if I was had enough food or had enough money for rent. When I talk about the caste system, like when I talk about systemic racism, in the Mormon church, I was the lowest of the low. And my sister and brother, because they had been baptized and married in the covenant and they'd been returned missionaries, they were higher up in the caste system. So, like for me, that was the reality. And again, too, even within the Indian Act, because if you're educated, you're in the lowest caste system and you're cast out. You're no longer considered Indian. So a lot of these things too, if I married a white man, I would lose my status. Again, I'd be the lower caste system. So that's why when I talk about fancy boys and fancy girls, and I talk about Métis people, the government set it up that way so that it looked like they're prostitutes, like that they're, like they're the lowest of the low in the caste system, and that's how I grew up hearing anybody who was mixed blood was of the lowest of the low, and then as time changed, and people started being voted and voted in, and more people who were fancy boys and fancy girls got into politics. The reality, or even like I said, even within my own family structure, having siblings who don't want to identify as being Indigenous. I know it's a hard pill to swallow, but even talking to my nephew this morning, and he says, "Yes, Auntie," he says, "it's all over." We different families within my community, that even though you have siblings who you know that they're Indigenous, they have some sibling that might not, want to identify as being Indigenous. And again, that's okay. I mean, for me, identifying as Indigenous, like I really have to when I talk to my elder female friends, and the criticism, oh, are you bisexual? Are you lesbian? And I said, use this baseline. I said, if you use this baseline, consider that all human beings are bisexual, and that's the baseline. And somewhere along that baseline, you're either heterosexual, bisexual, or you're somewhere swinging somewhere in between that baseline. I said, that's how life is. Unless you have a ability to have a conversation about he, she, they, them, pronouns, and if you have to know about polyamory and all the definition of healthy human sexuality, as an elder, this is something new. Like I said, until the pandemic, I didn't even know people could access porn. And that's why I'm just like I know people probably listening are laughing and going, "You poor thing," but why do you think I'm trying to be open about this? Is because I'm just one Indigenous elder, and I'm open and I talk about it, and I've talked to young white women. They talk about sex toys and masturbation, and I said, you can talk to me about this, but you can't talk to other Indigenous elders like this. There are certain protocols in place. So that's why I try to use my podcast to be open about the reality of what intergenerational trauma has had on the effects of healthy human sexuality. And for me, like I said, my one sister believes that I'm gay, but that's been her issue so long ago. Even before I moved to Utah, she was, just telling people certain women were lesbian. I've confronted her. She's never going to change. I mean, Mormonism, they just don't like homosexuality. And then for my brother to just not even, if he has issues in thinking that our father isn't his dad, he should take a DNA test. This whole stuff is like so mind-boggling to me that like I'm going, I for me I have no if he's not my father's son, that's okay. It changes whole dynamics of housing policy and land policies, because everything that's tied to my me and my siblings comes from patriarchy, my father's line, my father's lineage, not my mother's lineage. My mother's lineage is, she's Dakota Sioux. So, the whole justification of how Indigenous people, how it's been set up through patriarchy is, creates a hell of a lot of problems and a hell of a lot of issues when it comes to family conflict. So, but I wanted to put that out there because it's just been horrific for me to feel. I don't like feeling this way. I really don't. I go through this once in a while throughout my life, but I usually have invisible helping hands, telling me that I'm a good person, and that other people see me as a good person, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful. It's just that I grew up with my brothers and sisters. It's heartbreaking. That's why when I talk about cults and intergenerational trauma, and when people say decolonize, young people say decolonize, I want people to understand that it's a very painful process. Decolonizing, we don't totally get decolonized. It's a process of just being on. Like my father used to just talk about honesty, but yet it's more than just honest. It's like learning how to feel and adjusting to it. I wish I had a magic wand, and I wish things weren't so complicated in this life. But there are so many children out there, and so many young people who have so much anger. Like I said, my dogs have been going missing, and I went. They've gone 5 kilometers away. I had a phone call from a childhood friend saying, "I saw your dog." The dog was heading into the city, and I'm going, "Oh no," because I didn't want them to be picked up by the city pound, go into the dog pound. So I went over there and I saw. They said the report was he was traveling with a group of men. So I saw these men and I drove up and I said, "Could you help me put my dog in the car?" Mistaken identity. That wasn't my dog. But what I'm trying to get at is those young men were so vulnerable, so triggered, they just started swearing at me. Didn't let me get a word in edgewise that it was mistaken, just swore at me. It was constant. It was horrendous. And then when I tried to tell them, "Look at how you're talking to me," I had to call the tribal police. Now, why am I bringing this up is because a lot of our children are FASE. They're adults. Their parents were drinking and they have fetal alcohol syndrome. But I want you to get to understand this. In England, when they had no water, and I want you to understand this, when you're talking about these data centers and clean water, like what the hell does the United States say? They're always selling alcohol. Well, in England, for 100 years, because they didn't have drinking water, everybody drank beer. And tell me, how did that society, how many of those people, children, were FASE? Because again, the biology of it, and then bringing that attitude into North America, and then again bringing alcohol into the Americas. They're saying, "Oh, we're just getting into the point where, when people found that cigarette smoking was bad for the health." Well, now they're saying like alcohol is bad for the health, but yet again, young people are dissecting all this and understanding it. Especially like when I was talking to my nephew, he says I didn't know anything about what you're talking about, central nervous system and balance, and he says I'm glad we had this conversation. So that's why I'm saying young people today. When I was growing up, all the people I grew up were healthy, didn't have any brain damage from fetal alcohol syndrome, because there was alcohol wasn't allowed. We were, again too, like we weren't rich anyway, even if there was alcohol. But the reality of it is, like in the United States, They're a generation before us, 100 years earlier or 50 years earlier. And so their generation have been dealing with fetal alcohol syndrome long before us. So when they had Wounded Knee, the standoff at Wounded Knee, those young people were already dealing with a crisis of fetal alcohol syndrome within the generation. And it caused a lot of problems, social problems like incest, sexual assaults, just really angry young people. And that's why I bring this, because the tribal police said, take it to chief, report it. I tried to report it, and one of the band counselors says, what did the tribal police say? I said, they told me to report it because this person is a non-nation member. But yet his children are all nation members, and his children have FASE. His children have issues of anger. And it's not just his children, like my cousin's children. They're, like she said, I tell my grandson, why do you lip off? Why do you have anger? Why do you constantly swear at people? She says, you're just a small little guy. Somebody's going to beat you up. And sure enough, like she told him, you went downtown Calgary, got mad at somebody, and they beat you up and broke your jaw. Well, that was like that's the reality. That's the reality of our young people who have FASE. And so for me, when I'm looking for my dogs, these little guys who just act like teenagers, when I'm looking for my dogs and I'm trying to see if this is my dog, and all I get is swearing and anger, and I'm going, I don't even know them. They don't even know me. I'm an elder and they're swearing at me. And I had another elder in my car as well, and they're swearing. And I'm going, how violent. And I thought, with all this white supremacy, especially in Calgary, Calgary is the most Americanized city in Canada. And then you have the Sons of Canada, these white supremacists, having their national gathering just next door, half an hour from where I live. And you have our young people in the Treaty 7 area who go into the downtown core, and if they are angry because they don't know how to regulate their emotions, these white supremacists will kill them. They'll beat them up. And that's why I said, even for me as a young woman going downtown and just going into a bar, night clubbing, and then coming out and seeing a whole bunch of 5 cars full of white guys, and they're catcalling us down because we're Indigenous women. There were about 5 of us getting into my car, and those white men came out to beat us up, got out of their vehicles, and there we were, just like men fighting men, and we were women. Like when I talk about systemic racism and I talk about white supremacy, and as a woman, and the crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women, I've always, like from that time on, I always made sure that whoever I was with, I would have a backup. I would have somebody there backing me up. So if I met somebody who hated me without even knowing me, that somebody would back me up. And the critical thing is like recently, like when, as an elder, when I'm invited to pray, they offer me tobacco. I come into that space. Well, it's gotten to the point now where I have to, the people who invite me, I have to say to them, you have to protect me when I come into this space. Whoever you've invited into this space, some of those young Indigenous people might be projecting their hate onto me because they have issues with Indigenous female and what I represent. They won't even know me. I'm a total stranger, but they'll take their anger out on me. I said, it's just the reality of being an Indigenous elder woman. I can't even comprehend what it's like to be an Indigenous young woman. Now, the reality of it is it's not the same with Indigenous men. An Indigenous man can go around, like my brother could go around and invite people to come to his house and get into a teepee, and he thinks he's like some holy man. With Indigenous men, it's different. They can play like they're some holy man. And that's why I said with Nathan Chasing Horse, he got away with that. He got away with that because because it's acceptable. But see, people don't realize that, and especially men who have a pipe or pray, and they're offered tobacco, and they see a woman come into that space, and somebody offers that woman tobacco. Those men are intimidated, and yet they don't realize that walking into that same space has a kick on it. For them, they'll be respected. For them, they'll be honored. But for a woman, they'd be hated, even if they don't even know that woman. So that's the difference. That's colonial ways of thinking and constructs of gender violence. So it's so subtle and so sublime. That's why, for me, doing what I do, even within my family, keeping structure, like I said to my nephew, for a whole decade, I haven't talked, for 13 years now, I haven't talked to my brother. I don't need to be in an argument with him, my Mormon brother. My Mormon sister, I don't need to, boundaries. I have boundaries with them. I just need, like I said to him, I have peace. I'm at peace. I don't need to get involved with whatever they're planning. But for me, they had to have my signature to approve, and I was just one of the siblings. So I told my nephew, here, take it. I approve. I said, because I'm an elder. Whatever's going to happen, I'm going to be 6 feet underground. And the fact that my siblings are already treating me that way, it's heartbreaking. And I told my nephew, they're the ones who are suffering because they don't know who I am. They don't want to interact with me. They don't want to challenge my values and beliefs and what I understand. And I'm their sister. I'm their older sister. I'm their older sister who's never married, who's never had children. I'm the older sister who's never been involved in family violence. Like, I'm the older sister who's never, been on Skid Row selling my sorry ass. I'm the older sister who's never, been a chronic drunk, begging for money so I could buy alcohol or booze. I've never been, I'm the older sister who's never put a needle up her arm. All the stereotypes, all the horrific shame and guilt of what it is to be an Indigenous woman, and they project it onto me and I'm their sister. So yes, I can say all these things, and I can understand, and I can try and explain. It's such an unconscious thing that people don't even know they're doing it, because it's so, they don't realize that they're doing this. This is part of the way they think, and they're seniors. So yes, I'm trying to say this to educate young people too. It's just the intergenerational trauma, and one's inability to heal. So, and I don't know, I don't want this podcast to be a pessimistic thing. I am who I am, and I'm trying to help as many people understand what intergenerational trauma is, because I sure as hell didn't know. I sure as hell didn't know. I could point the finger at my former chief's sister denying she's Indigenous, but look at my brother and sister. Mormon church, when you die and you go to heaven, your skin transforms to whiteness. You go into the celestial kingdom, like you're there for, like happy la la la. Jeez, what can I say? This is life, and the beauty of life, and what life has to offer us, just in the most simplest things. Instead of making it so horrible because someone isn't controlling another person. So anyway, I wanted to do just a quick podcast on this because, like I said, it's an emotional thing for me. It's a very emotional for me, because other times I would have a therapist that I would call, or I had a forensic psychologist I would call, who wasn't my therapist, just somebody I would call. Or I'd have a white friend I'd call. And, the reality of it is, like, in my prayers, when I ask Creator to embrace me with protective, reflective, healing energy, I also ask Creator to release me from self-defeating ideologies or idolations or illusions or delusions or reality of what I think, because that's creator and grandmother and grandfather's will. I don't know why I have to do these things and the reasoning why it's so heartbreaking. But for me, trying to let people know what it feels like to have such hate projected onto you, when all I've ever tried to do is just keep my boundaries, keep peace within myself, and just live the best life I have for the remainder of my life. I don't like I said, it's um, like I said to my nephew, and even my brother, my other brother, and he said, we can't change people. And so, like, that's why I'm saying, here I am in tears, knowing like I can't change my brother and my sister who are Mormon. I can't. They're set in their ways. This is who they are right until the bitter end when they leave this world. And the sad reality of it is, like, all I can remember of them now is just what I knew of them when we were growing up, because they refused to treat me good. They refuse to look at me as if I'm, a human being. It's sad that whatever stereotype or their values and beliefs and what they see me as. Like, and I don't really know if they like, I know the one sister thinks I'm gay. So what? So what if I'm gay? If my brother thinks I'm a pedophile, so what if I'm a pedophile? Like I'm telling you, all the things when it comes to restorative justice or just understanding the psychology of human behavior, I don't know what else I can do. I don't know what else I can help people with. And maybe that's one of the reasons I do what I do, is because I know it's a losing battle for me, trying to even educate my own brother and my own sister. I can't change the way they see me. And I'm grateful for those people who've had glimpses of who I am throughout my life. If I can help anybody and do things to help people, and for brief moments, I do get that. I do get certain thank yous from certain people. And I do, like, I appreciate the people who do listen to me on YouTube and on my podcast, and also on my blog. I'm grateful. It's like I said, the ability to heal oneself takes a huge community. And so even though I've disclosed what I have with you, understand this. The ripple effect of everything that I've been doing isn't just within the podcast, it's within my community as well. So it just doesn't stay stagnant. It's got a life of its own. So understand that it's important to tell your truth. It's important to talk about how you feel, even if it's so painful, and even if it's something that has been repeated throughout your entire life. Like I explained to my nephew, I said, when he says I stay sober maybe 2 weeks and my job keeps me sober, and I said to him, it gets a little easier each time that you in recovery and relapse. I said it's an ongoing process. It becomes easier. So, like, talking and dealing with people who, are coming from different ways of living and different ways of knowing things. It's important. It's important that we're there to listen. And if I can, like I said, most of the young people who I do talk to, I'm very fortunate that they're in the arts community, that they're two-spirited, or that they are, like I said, a lot of times I hear a lot of information from educated lawyers, Indigenous lawyers, and so I'm educating myself, even as old as I am, to bring information to you, my audience, and how it applies to me as an Indigenous woman, as an Indigenous elder. So with that, I hope I've helped you understand, and hopefully, like, my next podcast isn't going to be such a tearjerker, because, like I said, I've had to go through this. It's like a relapse this week, and I've had to struggle with this, and it's okay. Like I said, this isn't my first rodeo. This is my and like what I say, oh, those aren't my monkeys. It's not my circus, or the analogy as the fry bread burns. It's just you gotta find humor and stuff. Can't let things weigh you down to the point where you feel like giving up. So hopefully, like, if you're struggling with addictions, just know that be kind to yourself. If you feel shame and guilt of whatever you've gone through, that shame and guilt will stop, because you'll get over it. But you have to be patient with yourself and show yourself some love. It's a process that we carry with us right until our very last breath. Okay, so have a good day. I said, like, I wanted to get this out before I go into town and get something like treat myself with something delicious. Okay, adios, amigos.